Good evening, everyone, and welcome to WTAF. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Amy, and
And
it's good to be here tonight.
it is good to be here. How's everyone doing down there in the chat? I'm going to give it just a couple minutes. I'm waiting for a couple things to load here on my end.
Cool. I haven't talked to you all day.
Yeah, I haven't talked to you either. It's crazy, right?
I know, but I did talk to you at 4:30 in the morning. So
You did.
there's
You
that.
did.
And Manda too.
Yes, yes. Can everybody in the chat let us know if you can hear us okay?
Yeah, sound check. Thanks, pals and pugs. Welcome.
Yes, and we have some new people who joined our membership. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate that. I have a couple things I want to talk about before we get started. I'll make it quick, I promise. If you listened the other night to our letters that we read by Letitia, I just uploaded a video not too long ago of just a reading of the letters. So if you want to listen to those, they're interesting to listen to. What else was there? We've had a couple questions about if you join Patreon or if you join the YouTube membership, like, do you get the same benefits? So the answer is yes, to an extent. If you join the lowest level of Patreon, you get the same benefits as a YouTube member, which gives you access to our Patreon and YouTube member only lives. Other than that, I think that was it.
Yeah. And then we have our same rules as always. As always. Please don't talk about other creators, good or bad, in the chat. Be kind to each other. If you have something to promote, email us, wickedtruths@wtaf.net. We're open to that. We're open to sharing. We're open to promoting. But we just like to be asked first. So
Absolutely.
that's pretty much it.
Yeah. A lot of people keep making comments about what's wrong with YouTube. The stream is jumping around. That's something with YouTube. YouTube is working on it. The replay will be okay. You do have the option to leave and come back, and you also have the option to rewind a little bit and it fixes it for some reason.
Yeah, if you
So,
stay like 2 minutes behind, 2 to 3 minutes behind, maybe,
mhm.
it solves the buffering issue. So it's
Yeah.
happening to all the channels. What book are we reading tonight?
We are reading One Foot in the Grave by Chad Daybell.
Oh, wait. New phone. Who dis? Yay!
Yeah. Amy Elliott, the icons, you don't get the icons on Patreon. Patreon is just something that's not, they don't offer that. So I
Right.
guess we'll go ahead and get started.
Sounds
And
like a good deal to me. All
yeah,
right. Let me open up my textbook. I'll read about the author.
go ahead. That's all
Okay.
you.
About the author. In addition to working for more than a decade as a cemetery sexton, Chad Daybell had worked in the publishing business for the past 2 decades and has written nearly 30 books. He is currently the president of Spring Creek Book Company. Visit, springcreekbooks.com to see the company's lineup of titles. Learn about Chad at his personal website, www.cdaybell.com.
How
Fun.
exciting. Everybody wants to learn about him. Huh? All
Right?
right. Yeah, I can start with the first chapter. Thank you, Finding Hope. Um,
I'll do that and I'll flip back over to the chat then.
okay. So I just before we begin, like officially begin, the reason we're reading this is because it gives people a great insight into Chad's ego. I read this in full a couple months ago, and it really upset me. Not like, like made me cry, upset me. It made me dislike him even more. So, um, yeah, his ego is out there loud and proud.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Irish.
Yay!
All right, here we go.
All
One
right.
foot in the grave. One foot in the grave. The strange but true adventures of a cemetery sexton. Yeah, we'll do that. Author's note. The original version of this book was released in 2001, soon after I retired. After 5 years as a cemetery sexton, I then took a job in the private sector without any intention of ever working again in a graveyard. The great re- then the Great Recession struck, and the business where I was working shut down. As luck would have it, the position of cemetery sexton opened up at a different cemetery in the area. I applied and got the job, where I worked for another 5 years and had several more entertaining and unforgettable experiences. In recent months, I felt it was now time to expand the original book by adding new anecdotes and updating several of the original stories. I hope you like the additions. Chad Daybell, July 2019, which is an interesting date, right? So, Chapter 1. Step inside if you dare. Are you looking for spooky true stories, bizarre occurrences, and to get a tingle up your spine? If so, you have found the right place. Come inside the cemetery gate and ignore the mysterious shadows that seemingly dance away. Some people really love cemeteries, but a graveyard can be a frightening place, especially at night. Even in the most amusing settings, such as in Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, the cemetery is shown as a place where you'll get scared out of your wits. That portrayal might be on target. Let me tell you what happened to my neighbor while she and her friends were approaching our local cemetery during a fierce snowstorm. As their car drove slowly past the cemetery gate, my neighbor saw a middle aged woman walking alongside the road, carrying a baby in her arms. She also noticed that the woman appeared terribly sad and wasn't wearing a coat, although the baby was wrapped in a small blanket. My neighbors and her friends decided to give the woman a ride. It took a few moments to turn the car around, but as they drove back towards the cemetery, the woman was nowhere to be seen. They parked the car and searched for her, thinking she had taken shelter under a tree. But there was one peculiar problem. Their own tire tracks were the only marks in the fresh snow. There weren't any footprints to be found. The snow was smooth and untouched along the road where the woman had been walking a few moments earlier. My neighbor isn't the only person to mention this sad-faced woman to me. This ghostly apparition has been seen on at least 3 different occasions by cemetery visitors, each time in the middle of a snowstorm. Life among the headstones. Some people just called me a grave digger, but my official title was cemetery sexton. However, a 4-year-old visitor once called me the sexy one. That is inaccurate, but kind of catchy. I mean, I'd have to agree with that 4-year-old. And I can't believe a 4-year-old would call him that, but hey. Sexton is actually an English word for one who maintains church property. Since most English graveyards were originally situated next to churches, the word became linked to cemetery maintenance workers. But if the name still seems strange, just refer to me as many cemetery visitors did. They called me the guy. Such as, hey, are you the guy who runs this place? Death is now a mystery. Death has developed a frightening reputation in our modern world. We sometimes forget that for thousands of years, the burial of a loved one was usually taken care of by the family itself. Even some of our great-grandparents were accustomed to helping bury a family member. Ugh, he's gross. Being asked to dig a relative's grave was a commonplace. Today, we usually die in hospitals. A mortician takes away the body, and strangers handle the burial. Family members rarely see the body except at a brief viewing, which adds to the feeling of mystique and disconnection from the deceased. But death and burial are things we all face in our families, and a little education on the subject is better than the confusion and fear I saw among many funeral participants. So in these pages, I will debunk many graveyard myths, toss in a few true stories from around the world, and share some of my own experiences that leave little doubt that something awaits us beyond this life. I hope it is an eye-opening experience for you. All I ask is that you please leave any preconceived notions at the cemetery gate. How long do you go? Or how low do you go? You may have heard that when a person is buried, he is 6 feet under. That depth is more a myth than fact. Actually, we dig the hole about 5 feet deep, which is sufficient. The days are long gone when you could wrap a body in a blanket and bury it along a trail or in a cave. Today, nearly all communities require that burials take place in a cemetery, and a person's casket must be placed in a concrete vault. The typical burial vault is 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 3 feet tall, with the lid on. That means the top of the vault is about 2 feet below the ground once the burial is complete. I had to unearth a few burials, and I assure you that 2 feet of soil on top of the vault is plenty. It's pretty interesting, right? Because JJ wasn't buried very deep in the ground when he was found on Chad's property.
Right.
I believe it was like less than 2 feet or close to 2 feet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh. There's like premonitions in this book, and it disgusts me. It's hard to read it knowing what we know now. Anyways, I'll go on. Where is the burial vault? People often ask, why haven't I ever seen a burial vault? Here's a secret. The vault is already in the grave when the funeral arrives. A vault company employee arrives a few hours before the funeral and puts the vault in the hole minus the lid. The employee then places wooden planks along each side of the grave to avoid a cave-in. The vault employee covers the planks with AstroTurf before leaving, and he also puts a lowering device across the hole. This device has straps, and the casket is placed on these straps. When the family has departed after the service, the vault worker simply flips a switch on the device, and the straps slowly lower the casket into the vault. The worker then removes the straps, puts the vault lid on, and packs up his equipment. At the next graveside service you attend, look down into the hole before the casket is placed on the lowering device. Because everybody wants to do that, right? When you go to a funeral of somebody you care about, family member, friend, whatever, you want to look down in the hole. That makes sense. You usually see what appears to be a white slab of concrete. That is actually the bottom of the vault. Disappearing dirt. When we dug a grave, the backhoe operator put the dirt in a dump truck and hauled it away. Once the funeral was over, we brought the dirt back and dumped it in the hole. We then tamped the dirt down and replaced the sod. Some cemeteries just pile the dirt next to the hole and cover it with a tarp, but it is harder to clean it up that way. Of course, not every burial goes smoothly. The following incident happened during my first week as a part-time cemetery employee. The sexton and I had just buried a wealthy older woman when we saw the funeral hearse come speeding back down the road towards us. The mortician hopped out and breathlessly shouted, "Hold everything. The family wants her wedding ring." We were already tired. We protested, but we finally agreed to redig the grave. 20 minutes later, we had removed enough soil to carefully lift off the vault lid with the backhoe. Once the lid was out of the way, the mortician hopped down into the hole and opened the casket. There, the old lady, as peaceful as a dove. The mortician grabbed her lifeless hand and tugged mightily on the cherished ring. After a lengthy struggle, he finally worked the ring off her stiff finger. He put her hand back where it had previously rested and shut the casket. He angrily climbed out of the hole and said, "Sorry about that. The family should have decided they wanted the ring before she was in the ground. Seeing that woman's body shook me up for a few days. Then I was glad to learn that redigging a grave was a rare occurrence. The incident also showed me that grave robbing isn't a viable option in this modern era. Such a task is basically impossible to do without a backhoe. Even then, it is too much work. What would you take? Some jewelry and gold fillings? Don't waste your time." Who will bury me? A cemetery sexton is at the center of a large system of people who keep a cemetery running. To make the stories in the subsequent chapters more understandable and entertain, I will introduce you to the people who know more about burials than most ghosts do. Morticians. This profession is obviously linked with death in cemeteries. In reality, morticians aren't at the cemetery very often, except during funerals. They often spend most of their working hours at the mortuary. The mortuary business is often a family affair, and the funeral director is usually a descendant of the original founder. He mostly handles the administrative side of things, but certainly helps out during these times. Each mortuary also has at least 2 other certified morticians. I greatly admire these people who have to face the bloody stomach churning part of this business. He admires that. Gender. The typical mortician is an older gentleman, but a growing number of women serve as morticians. In fact, the Funeral Consumers Alliance, 40% of graduating morticians are now women. Appearance. Morticians are known for being dignified and well-groomed. The men almost always wear a dark suit and tie, and the women wear stylish business attire. Essential qualities. This is a job for someone with a strong stomach and a good sense of humor, along with a true sense of compassion. Education. Full-time morticians graduate from an extensive college program that teaches them the basic skills they need. Smaller mortuaries often hire part-time assistants who do the hair, fingernails, and makeup of the deceased, or who drive the hearse to the cemetery. It really is a demanding job, ranging from late-night pickup calls to the embalming process. Of course, being a mortician doesn't always work out. One of my mortician friends left the business to sell computers at a local office supply store. He didn't have the stomach for it. Who can blame him? We're going to skip the cemetery secretary part because that's boring. Cemetery sexton. That brings us to the position I held for many years. It's boring as hell.
Because that part's boring?
Oh, it's all boring. But we got to get to the good part where Chad puts himself up on a pedestal and he scrapes a dead person into a snow shovel. I can't get past that. Sorry for any spoiler alerts. That brings us to the position I held. Not me, Danielle. I, as in Chad Daybell, held for many years. I was actually quite young when I took the job as a cemetery sexton. I was 27 years old, having had 4 years of previous experiences on the cemetery crew. But the typical sexton is usually at least middle age, having worked his way through the system. Gender, nearly always male, but I expect to soon see a woman in the profession. Appearance, the attire is casual. Levi's and a decent shirt usually work well in trying to find clothes that can get dirty but are still acceptable to the public. I wore a hat during the summer. mainly to cut down on my chances of skin cancer. Jesus Christ. Oh, this guy. My crew wore the same type of clothing. Essential qualities. A sexton must be able to supervise a work crew, plus do whatever else is required, such as operating a backhoe and a dump truck. Good public relation skills are a major plus when you deal with grieving people. Optional skills. Working outdoors requires a strong tolerance for heat in the summer and cold in the winter. Also, a sexton should be prepared to give up his weekends, since Saturday is a popular burial day. In my opinion, this is the best occupation listed in this chapter, despite some drawbacks you will read about later. We're going to skip the crew members because no one cares. We don't care about the riding lawnmower personnel or the burial vault. Yeah, we'll go to this one. Chapter 3, Graveyard Do's and Don'ts. Although you'll find some tongue-in-cheek humor in this book, I want to make it clear I have a deep respect for cemeteries and their occupants. It angers me to see people act disrespectfully in the cemetery. As a sexton, I saw nearly everything over the years, and I've seen proper and improper cemetery etiquette. Let's go through a few examples. The first one should be obvious. Don't remove your clothing at funerals. One poor drunk soul drove his Chevy truck off a cliff, and his funeral was attended by several men who lacked proper cemetery etiquette. As soon as the service was over, these guys removed their shirts and began blasting heavy metal music from their trucks. 3 of them pulled cold beers from a cooler in their truck, which seemed very insensitive considering how the young man had died. A scuffle even broke out among them over the last beer. The dead man's... The comments are cracking me up down there. Oh, the dead man's family quickly left, obviously shocked at the group's behavior. Thankfully, the group's girlfriends refrained from also going topless. I can't. But I can't. A freaking joke. Okay, but I kept the police department's phone number handy just in case. I hope the deceased man enjoyed his very noisy, inappropriate send-off. Here's another word of advice and etiquette from Chad. Don't smoke until the service is over, guys. If at all possible, hold off lighting up your cigarette until you are leaving the cemetery. I've seen some people get pretty irritated when the person next to them starts puffing away during the graveside service. If you need to smoke that badly, please stand several yards away from the group. Also, it would be nice if you deposited your cigarette butt in a nearby garbage can. It makes me feel a bit sad when there are more, oh my gosh, when there are more cigarette butts near a new grave than flowers. That happened many times. Don't yell at the sexton if you're upset. Many people feel that shouting at the sexton is productive. This is not true. I don't need to explain my feelings toward a man who cursed at me for 5 minutes because an employee trimmed the rose bush on his wife's grave slightly shorter than he preferred. After such treatment, I seriously considered pruning the man's rose bush to the ground level. I understand that people get emotionally attached to a gravesite, but that man went overboard. Of course, on the other hand, do bring the sexton a pizza. One wise lady sent me a Pizza Hut medium supreme for keeping an eye on things. You can be sure I kept a close eye on her son's burial plot after that. I even went out of my way to brush grass clippings off his headstone when I went past it. The generous lady followed up that initial offering every few months with peanut brittle, chocolate, and so on. Obviously, when she had a concern, I immediately hurried to resolve it. Another visitor gave me a box of chocolates for raising a low spot in the sod near his wife's grave, and I paid extra attention to his plot for as long as I worked there. One family always slipped a Christmas card under my door. Who would have thought of giving the sexton a holiday card? It was truly appreciated. Maybe Hallmark can start a new category. I'm not advocating bribery, but showing a little kindness might pay big dividends for you. Besides, your sexton might appear to be an illiterate blue collar guy, but he could be secretly writing a book about you. He's an asshole. Ugh. Don't betray the sexton's trust.
No.
I always I was always eager to help cemetery visitors, but I grew more wary after the following incident. One afternoon, a lady came to the cemetery office and we located her ancestors' graves. She thanked me profusely for helping her out. I didn't see her again for a few months until she flagged me down and said that she had recently wrecked her car on the road near the cemetery. She told me the situation and I sympathized with her. Then she went on her way and I thought I'd never see her again. The next day, I received a visit from the city manager saying the woman had come to City Hall claiming I would testify in her behalf. She said the city was negligent in its road construction and should pay for her car's damage. This left me stunned, and I quickly told him my side of the story. He thanked me, then he returned to his office. Within an hour, the woman pulled up at my office in a rental car. She jumped out and shouted profanities at me before stomping away. Her final words were, "I thought you were a nice person, but I guess I was wrong." I still shake my head over that one. And no, the city didn't pay for her damaged car. Do obey the posted signs. Most cemeteries post signs that state no playing sports or no dogs allowed. It is amazing how many people think these signs don't apply to them. One of the hardest calls to the police I made was when an old high school classmate started bringing his dog to the cemetery each morning. He would let his dog out at the gate, then speed his car through the cemetery to make his dog chase the car. This presumably gave the dog some exercise. After the third day of this routine, I finally called the police and asked them to have an officer wait at the cemetery's bottom gate the next morning at 7 a.m. Sure enough, the pattern was repeated, and my classmate nearly ruined his tires as he squealed to a stop in front of the police car. The speeding ticket and the dog without a leash warning were enough to stop the daily dog exercise. Interestingly, my classmate never mentioned his ticket to me, and he probably doesn't realize I had a part in it. He will now. I usually ignored the occasional kids in the cemetery flying kites or playing catch with the Nerf football, but I always stopped full-fledged football and baseball games. The cemetery's open grass is alluring to young competitors, but a field dotted with headstones just isn't the place for bone-jarring tackles or ricocheting line drives. Don't thank the sexton by ruining his life. This strange series of events began one autumn day when my crew and I disinterred a woman whose family wanted her reburied in another town. After the vault guy hauled the body and the headstone away, we refilled the now empty hole and put the sod back in place. 2 weeks later, a stone guy brought a different woman's headstone to the cemetery. He checked his work order, read the burial site as plot number 152, and put the headstone on his now empty grave. On this now empty grave. He can hardly be faulted, since it appeared to be a fresh grave. A large winter storm hit the following day, and the new headstone was soon covered with snow for a few months. The following spring, I noticed the headstone was in the wrong place. As I checked it out, The stone should have been placed in plot number 251 instead of 152. The two spots are nearly 200 yards apart, and I was surprised the family hadn't brought this error to my attention. The deceased woman had an unusual surname, and I tried to contact anyone in the phone book with the same name, but she didn't seem to have any relatives in the area. After 2 days of deliberation, I decided to correct the error by moving the headstone to its proper location. Naturally, the change was noticed within a day by the dead woman's distant relatives. By that afternoon, I had a large group of people outside my office demanding an explanation. They were certain that I had moved their relative's body without permission. I explained that the body hadn't moved an inch since the burial, but these people repeatedly called me a liar, claiming there was a conspiracy. The family then called the mayor and the local newspaper, saying the city was moving bodies around without notifying families and were possibly selling body parts. They demanded that I be fired immediately. Of course, I have never moved the body, which had rested peacefully in plot number 251 all winter. All I did was put the headstone where it belonged. As this strange controversy swirled around me, I asked their family spokesman this question. If you paid for the headstone, didn't you ever wonder where it was? He promptly responded, "Oh, we knew where it was, and we've even visited it several times." I then asked, "Didn't it ever feel it was in the or did it sorry guys. I then asked, "Didn't it ever feel it was in the wrong place? You attended the funeral, didn't you? The two sites are nowhere near each other." "Well, we've had a big fight going on in the family about that," he said. "Then why didn't you contact the city and find the right spot?" I asked. He glared at me and said, "Because the city workers are a bunch of bumbling liars who move bodies around." At that comment, I just walked away. The mayor and city council soon realized what kind of people they were dealing with, and my job was never really in jeopardy. However, the city did make an unusual request. They asked me to publicly apologize to the family for putting the headstone in the right place. Such is life. Okay, I gotta take a breather for a second.
I'm sorry, I just heard the funniest thing. Finding Hope said, "And then Grandpa, with his gold tooth, came back from the dead and set everything straight."
That's hilarious. This book, the more you read it, he'll get to the parts where, oh my gosh, he's like, he has no respect for the dead. Obviously, we know that now. He has no respect for the living either. But looking back at when he, was a sexton during that time frame, he had no respect for the people, the deceased people,
or their family,
or their families that he was to care for and do things the correct way. It's disgusting.
It really is. It really is.
So,
do you want me to pick up?
If you want to, yeah, I can look at the
Sure.
chat.
Let me just, what chapter are you on? Because I'm not in the book when I'm in the chat.
Oh, well, here, I'll just finish this one and then I'll tell you what chapter. I can't scroll back.
No problem.
Do ask the sexton for help locating a grave. That story leads to this obvious point. You might remember Aunt Ethel's funeral like it was yesterday, but the cemetery is constantly changing with new headstones being added, trees getting taller, and so forth. So I always watched for people who were wandering aimlessly through the cemetery because it was a good sign they were looking for a relative's grave. These people often weren't within 50 yards of the burial site, and they were sometimes in a completely different section of the cemetery. Most cemetery employees are eager to help you, Let me back up. Most cemetery employees are eager to help you out if you approach them kindly, and it will save you many hours of frustrated searching. Don't read in the cemetery at night. One curious complaint came after my crew and I readjusted the floodlight that shined on our American flag. The light had slipped a bit over the years and had been shining in the eyes of drivers on the nearby highway. The day after we fixed it, a man came into my office asking me to lower the light again. I explained it was now in the proper position. He stammered and frowned, then finally said, "Well, maybe this will put a stop to it." I asked him what he meant, and he said, "When my wife can't sleep, she'll drive out here in the middle of the night and read out loud to our daughter who is buried here. When she couldn't see the pages last night and asked me, but she couldn't see the pages last night and asked me to come talk to you." He paused as if hearing what he was asking for the first time. He then mumbled, "Sorry," and quickly left the office. I didn't readjust the light. Hold on one moment.
No, you guys are right. He had no respect for anybody deceased, including Tylee and JJ. None. And yeah, he did. Apparently, Tracy L., he thought this was book worthy. Yeah.
Okay. Don't ask me to work the graveyard shift. Since I lived in a small town, many people knew what I did for a living, and some of them had no problem calling me as late as 10 p.m. to complain about something. I kept hoping they would realize I didn't do much work out there after dark. I usually politely said, "Thanks for calling, and I'll check on that in the morning. But in the future, please just leave a message at my office." They seemed stunned when I didn't say, "I'll get out there and fix it right now." This is stupid. Let me get to parts that aren't as stupid. Don't. I can't stand him.
What do you call a potato's office?
What do you call what? A potato's office?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you call it?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of a word for it.
Potato bin?
A potato bin.
I don't know.
Potato pile.
Yeah.
The sack.
Potato sack.
Let's not talk about that. That's gross. Ew.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Don't expect to borrow electricity. I enjoy the holidays just like everyone else, but one family considered me to be Ebenezer Scrooge. Every December, they begged me to let them run an extension cord from my office to light a Christmas tree on their relative's grave. He can't write either. It should be I continuously refused. So they eventually took their request to the mayor, who supported my decision. The mayor told the family the city can't afford to light everyone's cemetery decorations. Frankly, the last thing I needed to worry about during a winter storm was hitting extension cords when I plowed snow from the roads. What will people want to do next on the holidays? Fireworks for the dead on the 4th of July? Oh, I forgot. That happened too. Ugh. Don't move previously buried bodies. Even after retiring, this is still my greatest pet peeve. My worst experiences in the cemetery came with when family members decided to reorganize their burial plots after some family members are already in the ground. I firmly believe in the phrase, "rest in peace." I cannot emphasize strongly enough that digging up your relative is a horrible idea. The proper thing to do as a family is to plan ahead when everyone will be buried. If one of your children dies, you'll likely buy 3 lots. I advise you not to bury the child in the middle, because most likely you'll eventually wish you hadn't. That's exactly what happened in the following disturbing story. I have to mute for 1 second.
Sure. This is called Etiquette in the Cemetery, according to Chad, apparently. Goodness. Yes, Tracy. Is this how to be a cemetery sexton in 5 easy lessons? The potato portal. Oh my God. I can't.
Okay, I'm back.
Sluts, you crack me up.
I had to let the dogs in real quick. In 1954, a family lost a teenage son named Ray, and they followed the bury him in the middle routine so that each parent could be buried next to him. Well, Ray's mother died in the 1970s, and by the time his father died in 1990, any sentiment for Ray from the rest of the family was long gone. They barely remembered him. The remaining siblings naturally wanted their parents buried next to each other, and in their minds, the solution was simple. They'd just pay some extra money to move Ray over one spot and then put Dad where Ray had been. It sounds so easy, doesn't it? Well, we dug down to Ray's vault and discovered it wasn't really a vault. In the 1950s, a vault often just consisted of either cinder blocks or thin slabs of concrete stacked like a house of cards. That's how Ray's vault was. We stopped our digging operation and called the family to explain that things could get messy really fast. They didn't care, though, and told us to get it done. We resumed our task and carefully removed the top slabs of the vault. See, my dog doesn't like Chad either. Exposing Ray's wooden casket. We now knew the rest of the vault would just collapse if we tried to move it, so we brought in a new vault and set it along the edge of the grave. Our goal was to carefully lift Ray's casket into the new vault. We climbed down into the hole and grabbed the casket handles to lift it out. But those ancient handles snapped right off in our hands. We noticed the casket was pretty moist, and I said, "This thing is going to fall apart on us." We had to proceed, though, and we finally put several straps around the casket and hoped for the best. We used the vault track's winch to slowly lift the casket, and we kept our fingers crossed as the casket reached ground level. Sadly, that's the last time poor Ray was in one piece. I know, Amanda, I hate that word. Hate it. The casket's sides crumbled in, and the whole thing imploded, like when they knocked down one of those old Las Vegas hotels. Suddenly, various parts of Ray were falling back into the hole in a different order than he would have preferred. I did notice he'd been buried in a nice brown suit, though. I will refrain from describing exactly how we eventually got Ray's body into the new vault, but let's just say it required snow shovels. I hope Ray has some strong words for his siblings when they someday meet on the other side. So, there's the snow shovel part. Don't trust Pamela. You'll understand why. I think so, Missy. Missy said, "Oh my God, he loved that, didn't he?" I think he did. Like he took pride in that, and even mentioned like his suit, and yeah, he was pretty proud of that moment. It's disgusting. Don't trust Pamela. You'll understand why. In a similar situation, a family's infant son had been buried in the center plot, and the father had been buried beside him many years earlier. Now, the mother had died, and the same clamor erupted to have mom and dad next to each other. All of the remaining 5 children met me at the gravesite, and they tried to convince me that there was plenty of room to squeeze mom next to her husband without disturbing their long-dead brother. I had checked the maps and the records, and I strongly disagreed with them, but they wanted me to go ahead with it. I asked why they were so sure I wouldn't hit the baby's coffin when digging the grave, and they all glanced in the direction of their youngest sister, a frightening little waif with a fake diamond stud in her nose. One of the brothers leaned toward me and whispered, "Our sister Pamela is psychic. She can see the vaults underground and says everything will be fine. She says the baby's vault is on the far side." Well, Pamela ought to buy a new tape measure because when we dug the grave the next morning, I hit her brother's coffin with my fourth scoop of the backhoe. There wasn't even a burial vault, despite the girls' claims, and the coffin was right in the middle of the plot, as I knew it would be. Even worse, I had clipped off the top of the coffin, and I could see the infant's body inside. I jumped into the hole, and my coworker and I carefully replaced the splintered part and moved the little coffin onto the grass. I resumed digging the grave, but I was absolutely fuming. I don't think I'd ever been more angry at a family because I couldn't get that little baby's face out of my mind. We finally decided to dig the grave about 7 feet deep, and then we reburied the baby at that level. His mother was buried the next day, a foot or so above him. I stayed in my office when the funeral arrived because I was afraid I would say something rude to the family. I found it curious that none of the family members even inquired whether we had hit the baby's coffin. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. After all, Pamela saw what is best for them. Don't ride on the cemetery's dirt piles. A tradition among local teenagers was to ride their motorcycles on our cemetery's dirt piles. I used to call the police when the bikers would show up, but the officers would never get there in time before the kids would speed away. These riders knew better than to come during a funeral, or so I thought. One day we held a funeral for an old lady near the dirt piles, and it was a quiet, somber occasion. Then I heard a motorcycle engine revving up on the far side of the dirt piles. I hurried in that direction, hoping to avoid the inevitable. I didn't make it in time. Maybe the kid never even noticed the funeral before he jumped, but it was amazing to see him soar off the dirt pile and land within 20 feet of several old ladies just as the graveside prayer ended. It would have been a perfect fit for Evel Knievel's funeral, but it wasn't for Gladys Ripple's service. Her family was not amused, and they made sure I knew about it. Don't call the cops about your headstone. As I mentioned in the previous story, cops aren't too good at catching bad guys in the cemetery, so I never understood why people call the police when their headstone is tipped over. Yes, it is a crime, but it is also a waste of a policeman's time. What's he going to do, dust for fingerprints? The best solution is to tell the sexton about it. Despite popular belief, a tipped-over headstone is rarely broken. It just needs to be put back on its base. The main reason to not call the police, though, is because the incident has an unusual angle, and it usually ends up in the newspaper police report. So within a week, there will be copycat crimes where even more headstones are knocked over. Thank you, Fossil Friendly. In a nearby town, a few headstones were knocked over in their cemetery, and a citizen called the newspaper. That wasn't a wise decision. The media blew the story out of proportion, and the story wouldn't die down. Naturally, there were 2 copycat incidents within a week, and suddenly the poor cemetery sexton was on TV, promising to stop the crime spree. I actually got calls from the local media seeking my comments on the situation. That cemetery had vandalism problems for several months, and it was all linked back to those news reports. It was like telling teenagers, "Are you feeling bored? Well, remember the cemetery? Come on over and cause some problems." The main reason I prefer to put to just put the headstone back in place is because news articles on the subject usually include a photo of cemetery workers grunting and squatting to lift a toppled stone. Of course, this type of work usually causes the workers to unintentionally show what is known in the blue collar world as plumber's crack. Right? You guys, I can't with him. He is, oh, we all know that's not a pretty picture, especially in the newspaper. That chapter's done. So it's chapter 4, Amy.
Okay. It's
Man.
let me just flip over. I just got out of the chat.
Oh, you're
Let
fine.
me flip over.
I'm going to look
Okay.
at the chat because I haven't looked in a while.
You want a minute or you want me to start?
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. Chapter 4, Bizarre but True. I sometimes come across cemetery-related stories in magazines or newspapers, and I often wouldn't believe them if they weren't documented. But these stories are all true. And throughout the rest of the book, I'll insert a few of these entertaining tidbits. I will start with the one I wish I'd seen. Elephants give a little lift. Albert Shorty Sharp of Springfield, Missouri, spent most of his 82 years caring for and training circus elephants. Fittingly, the big animals played key roles at his funeral. The outdoor funeral service began with huge Broadway Beau slowly pounding on a drum with a mallet held in his trunk. Then Buddy, a smaller elephant, served as a lone pallbearer as he slowly pulled Sharp's casket on a cart to the gravesite. Sharp had died of heart failure while traveling with the George Carden Circus in Wisconsin. His body was frozen so his friends, both human and pachyderm, could attend the funeral during a break in the circus schedule. On a tender note, one woman had fondly tucked a small stuffed elephant under Sharp's arm during his viewing, and the doll was buried with him. Larry, lay your head on my shoulder. We'll continue the animal theme for just a moment. One winter, we buried a couple who had been killed in a head-on collision. In their obituary, it was mentioned their dear pet dog Larry had also been killed in the accident. I didn't think much about it again until their headstone arrived a few months later. It listed the couple's names and Larry's. I soon saw the mortician who had taken care of their funeral. I took him aside and asked if Larry was actually in the ground too. He nodded, saying the couple's children had requested Larry be buried with their parents. It had cost the family extra money, of course, but the mortician had slipped Larry's remains into the father's casket right before leaving the mortuary. I figured this was highly unusual until I read a report that dealt with the subject. Often, a dog lover outlives his pet, and the owner has Lassie cremated. The pet's urn is then kept around the house until the owner dies, and then they are both buried together. Families like to keep it quiet, but it apparently happens fairly often. For all I know, I may have a whole kennel buried in my cemetery. God. I understand the family's motives, though. Besides the bond the owner and the pet had, it is less expensive than buying a plot in a pet cemetery. Or you could just build your own. Get a hotel room or use a jail cell. Let's get back to humans. It's not just folklore that cemeteries add spice to the love lives of many couples. I guess people seeking make-out point assume the local graveyard will be empty. I can understand a teenage couple looking for a place of solitude, but one couple who would regularly visit the cemetery really sickened me. The woman's father had recently died, so she and her boyfriend would visit the grave often. But usually their mourning turned into other passionate emotions, and they would make quite a spectacle of themselves right there on her father's grave. When I would see her car down there, I'd purposely drive the backhoe nearby to snap them out of their passion and remind them they were out in the open for all to see. They eventually got married, and I never saw them again in the cemetery. I guess the passion died, so to speak. Another interesting case occurred during a major snowstorm. It was about 8 a.m., and as I was trying to get our snowplow cleaned off and ready, I saw a woman pull an 18-wheeler into the cemetery. That in itself was strange, but it was followed by a city police car. I figured he was going to give the woman a ticket, and the two vehicles disappeared into the swirling snow. I forgot about them momentarily as I got the snowplow warmed up. But as I made my first plowing run through the cemetery a few minutes later, I saw the truck and police car parked at the bottom of the cemetery. I couldn't see either driver, but the vehicles were blocking my way, so I slowed down. Suddenly, the 18-wheeler's passenger door opened and the cop sprinted back to his car carrying his boots. He hopped in his car and sped off. The diesel then roared to life and also quickly left. I was admittedly curious about what I'd seen, so I stopped the snowplow and I walked to where the vehicles had been parked. I saw the footprints in the snow where the cop had sprinted to his car. This clearly wasn't just a routine traffic stop. That cop was lucky I didn't recognize him, although I don't think I would have reported him anyway. But I've often wondered if he had told the police dispatcher what he was doing while he was out in his squad car. I guess he should be applauded. He certainly was doing more than just picking up a box of donuts on his morning break. Oh, criminal mischief. It is surprising how many items are stolen from the cemetery besides someone's flowers. One morning we arrived to find all the batteries stolen from the cemetery's vehicles. The thieves have also cut the truck's gas lines and drained the fuel tanks. I hope it was worth their time. Thieves have also taken such things as our air compressors, tamping machines, and the U.S. flag right off the pole. But our strangest incident of criminal activity involved our riding lawnmowers. I arrived one Monday morning to find our mower operators extremely angry. They led me to our 3 riding mowers, and every tire had been slashed. We just shook our heads, knowing we had a long day ahead of us changing tires and getting replacements. Then I noticed a piece of paper jammed into a small opening in a nearby tree. I pulled it out and found a handwritten note that read, "I can't believe you died before we could get married. I love you so much, and I want to die and be with you, but it would break my mom's heart. I will never have another boyfriend like you, so instead of stabbing myself, I stabbed a bunch of tires to show you my love. Don't forget me." We called the police, and they took the note to check for fingerprints, but they didn't find anything. I went through the records and tried to pinpoint who this person's boyfriend could be, but without success. I finally decided to just leave the incident in the past. Who would have noticed? People often fret too much about things that really don't matter, but this one takes the cake. We were burying a man, we were burying a man around town as an outdoorsman. He'd always been a deer hunter, and he had requested to be buried in a flannel shirt and Levi's. Once the family was gone, we lowered his coffin into the vault, and we were nearly ready to put the lid on when the funeral hearse returned. We noticed the mortician had an unfamiliar woman passenger in the hearse with him. The mortician hopped out and said, "I'm really sorry, but this woman is the man's cousin, and she is throwing a fit because she thinks one of the buttons on his shirt is undone. Can I check it out? She says the family won't pay us until she knows for sure." It had been a slow day, so I said, "That's fine with me. Why not?" We took the vault lid off, and the mortician climbed down into the hole and opened the casket. Yes, the button directly over the man's belly button was undone. The mortician fastened it again and then shut the lid. "He's also wearing long johns, so he would have still stayed warm," he said with a tired smile. "Sorry to bother you guys." Whew, another crisis solved. Shoeless. I always do my best to keep the morticians happy. If they're happy, I'm happy. But one request was a little unusual. As the family gathered around the grave, the mortician pulled me aside and handed me a pair of Sunday shoes. He said, "We forgot to put his shoes on." "Whose shoes?" I asked. "The deceased," he said. "When everyone is gone, could you just pop the lid and put them on his feet?" I reluctantly agreed, but when the moment of truth arrived, I failed. We opened the lid slightly, and I felt around for his feet, but my hand went up his pant leg instead. The feel of his cold, fleshy calf nearly made me gag. I finally found one of his feet, but it was rigid. That was enough for me. I quickly placed the shoes near his feet and closed the lid. I queasily told my coworkers, he'll just have to put them on by himself. He's so disgusting. Ashes or gravel? Some people choose to be cremated before having their ashes buried in the family plot. I don't mind, since the size of the hole is much smaller, I can actually dig it by hand. One misconception is that a cremation is nothing but pure ashes, like the kind you would find in a fireplace. Actually, the cremation process isn't that pure. I found this fact out the hard way. The first several cremations I buried had arrived in nice solid boxes that weighed about 10 to 15 pounds. I would just put the box in the ground and fill the hole. Then one family dropped off a lady's cremated remains and requested that her ashes be placed in the same box as her deceased husband. The family members claimed there would be plenty of room. They went on their way, saying they'd be back in 2 hours to have a dedicatory dedicatory service. Well, I dug down and found the original box, and there was no way the second box would fit inside it. I knew the family would be back soon, and I wanted to honor their wishes, so I popped open the second box and pulled out the cremated remains, which were contained in a sturdy plastic bag. I couldn't help examining the contents. There were certainly some ashes, but there were also shards of bone and a few teeth. I guess they don't burn well. I opened the first box and molded the wife's remains around the husband's plastic bag the best I could. Then I closed the lid. I couldn't help thinking that Resurrection Day is going to be complicated for those two. It could look like a game of Twister.
Just wait, this is one of the parts coming up that absolutely, I still think about this after reading this next part. I wish I knew who this family was or if this story is true because it's repulsive.
Yeah. All right. You guys ready? A fitting farewell. As we all know, arrogant people are usually difficult to deal with. Unfortunately, the most arrogant ones can be annoying even in death. One local attorney had specified in his will that he desired to be buried in the largest coffin available. He wanted to go out in style. After the attorney's last breath, his family honored his wishes to the letter. My eyes nearly popped out of my head when I saw 10 pallbearers struggling under the weight of his monstrous casket. You could have housed a small family inside that thing. To accommodate the monstrous casket, the mortician had specifically ordered the largest burial vault made in the United States. It was so huge that the family had to buy an adjoining lot because the vault was too wide to fit in a single burial place. I had only buried one other person in such a large vault, and that person had weighed nearly 500 pounds. This attorney had been average size, though, and we were only going through all of this trouble because he wanted the best. He was about to get it. We lowered the casket into the vault, and it fit by the narrowest of margins. But when we tried to put the lid on, it merely clanked around. The casket was 6 inches taller than the vault. The vault guy hastily called up the mortician, who had returned to the mortuary with the family. He tried to talk to the man's children into switching their father's body into a smaller casket, but they wouldn't budge. Their father had wanted the best, and nothing else would do. When we heard that news, we felt pretty frustrated. It was getting dark, and rain was falling. Then the vault guy smiled and said, well, we've got an old septic tank at the shop we had to drain and pull out of the ground. He ought to fit in that. We readily agreed, so he called the mortician back and asked him to tell the family we had solved the problem. We widened the hole a bit more while the vault guy retrieved the used septic tank. He returned and lowered it into the hole. The stench wasn't too bad, and most importantly, the huge casket fit inside just fine. As we put the finishing touches on the grave, the mortician drove up to learn how we had solved the problem. When he found out what we'd done, he laughed so hard he started crying. I love it, he said. This guy always treated everyone just like the stuff that once filled that tank. What a perfect send-off.
See? He's
Mm.
literally a piece of
Mm-hmm.
shit.
He is. Uh,
He's disgusting,
yeah,
repulsive.
he is
To
repulsive.
think that even if this stuff is made up in his head, that's sick.
It's still disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tasteless, it's repulsive, yeah. Okay. Just pay the shipping. The following story made me smile only because I know so many people like this woman who makes crazy decisions just to save a few dollars. I won't include her last name. I'm sure this lady has suffered enough. In November 2000, a woman named Janet put her dead mother in her car's passenger seat and drove more than 1,000 miles from Colorado to an Oregon mortuary so that her mom could be buried next to her father. According to the Jefferson County, Colorado Sheriff's Office, Janet said she was trying to save money on the cost of shipping the body of 91-year-old Mildred to Oregon. Transporting a body across state lines without a death certificate is illegal, but authorities chose not to press charges against her. Janet told authorities that about an hour after her mother died in her home near Denver, she dressed her mother's body in a fresh set of pajamas, carried her to the car, and then took off for Oregon. After the mess was sorted out, a brief funeral service was held for Mildred. She was then buried next to her husband in Portland Cemetery. Her daughter was not available for comment. Oh, her daughter wasn't available for comment. Did he like interview her, like call her and ask her to put a
He
quote in the book?
probably, no, he probably tried to recruit her to his nonsense or something. She didn't want to talk to him.
Okay. Did the family ask for postal insurance? Several times I've received a cremation in the mail with instructions to bury the remains in the family plot. I doubt the postal worker had any idea what was in the package. However, there have been cases of cremation ending up at the wrong address. One newspaper article told of a woman's cremation getting lost on its way from Michigan to Idaho. It was eventually found on a post office shelf in California. Of course, if you don't trust the Postal Service, you can take things into your own hands. We had one family haul their deceased grandma in her casket across several states in the back of their station wagon. I thought those kinds of adventures only happened in movies. The family had the proper permits to transport her, but it was a weird sight to see young children sitting happily on each side of the casket. That's a trip those kids will never forget. What's that smell? I once received notice from a distant mortuary that they'd been bringing me a body for burial the next afternoon. The next day, I kept watching for a hearse to arrive, but instead, a car pulling a U-Haul trailer entered the cemetery. Sure enough, inside the trailer was a coffin. That trailer still carried a strong, distinct odor long after we took the coffin out. I felt sorry for the next person who rented that trailer. That's literally like a snippet he felt he needed to include. We only read the articles. Our cemetery is quite unique. It has quite a collection of adult magazines and videos. Of course, this collection is several feet underground. A few years ago, the local police raided a home and found a huge collection of pornographic material. The police department didn't want those items to get back among the public, so they hatched the novel idea of burying the collection in the cemetery. Our crew dug a deep hole in a spot where a cemetery road would soon be placed, and the police arrived with their stash in locked boxes. These boxes were buried inside two burial vaults. The vaults are 10 feet deep, and pavement now covers them. I can't think of a better place for such items other than a crematorium. This little section is called Dem Bones, Dem Bones. Speaking of trashy material, our cemetery garbage cans collect wilting things besides wilted flowers. Can you guess the number one item? Chicken bones from KFC. Apparently, eating Kentucky Fried Chicken during cemetery visits is very popular. McDonald's Happy Meal boxes are also quite abundant. I can just picture a father announcing to his family, "Hey kids, please quiet down while we go through the drive-through window. If you behave yourselves, we'll go eat at Grandpa's grave." I personally don't see many people eating in the cemetery during the day, so it must be more of a evening snack kind of thing. Yum yum. Of course, we occasionally find drug paraphernalia in the garbage cans, so apparently some people find other ways to relax during their visits to the cemetery. Peculiar picnic. One family took things a little too far, though, when it comes to the post funeral luncheon. Most families gather at a restaurant or a church for a brief meal following a funeral, but this family decided to have a picnic right next to the grave before we even buried their grandpa. The women spread out blankets and brought picnic baskets from their cars, while the men hungrily grabbed sandwiches and then lounged under a tree to watch us work. I didn't want to be the family's entertainment, so I asked the deceased widow if they wanted us to wait to bury her husband until they were finished eating. "Heavens no," she said. "It'll be interesting to watch." The next 10 minutes were excruciating for me as the vault guy and I did our best not to make a mistake. All the while, we were being watched by 20 pairs of eyes. The only sounds to break the silence were the munching of potato chips and the occasional crunching of a pickle. Watching the burial of a loved one apparently didn't affect their appetites in the least. Down on the farm. Large animals shouldn't be a major cemetery concern, but I cross paths with them more often than I'd like. For example, at one graveside service, I'm sorry. For example, at one graveside service at was nearly dark. Okay, it's just written wrong. Was nearly dark and everyone was milling around, but the preacher refused to start the proceedings. Almost 15 minutes passed before a man riding a horse came through the cemetery gate. He actually he actually was wearing a bandana, a hat, and an eye patch. He approached and yelled. I hurried as fast as I could. He tied the horse to a tree and joined the group. The mortician later said the guy had also been at the church. The preacher had agreed to wait for the guy to gallop from the church to the cemetery. The mortician heartily agreed with me that maybe next time the cowboy could leave the horse in the barn and just catch a ride. Less than a month later, another animal made a memorable appearance. I was sitting in my truck waiting for a funeral service to end when a large cow came rambling through the cemetery toward the burial site. I jumped out and tried to herd the cow away, but it seemed determined to reach that graveside service. One of my employees, Tony, also spotted it, but neither of us could change its course. The family of the deceased had also seen the cow, which was now within 15 yards of the casket. Some of the mourners were laughing, and a few of them even snapped some photos of the occasion. Finally, Tony grabbed a long stick and prodded the cow away from the funeral and into another part of the cemetery. I called the city's animal control officer to come help us, and he eventually lassoed the cow and led it back to the farm where it belonged. I'll never forget, though, how badly that cow wanted to take part in that funeral. Out of curiosity, I checked the background of the deceased lady to make sure there wasn't some strange cosmic connection between her and the cow. By all accounts, she had just been a typical housewife, although her obituary mentioned she was a vegetarian. Maybe the cow just wanted to stop by and tell her, "Thank you for being a friend." I would take a cow any day. We figured out how to handle a cow, but didn't do so well with large spiders. One summer, I began noticing huge beetle-sized spiders hanging in the cemetery's trees and bushes. A nearby mountain is notorious for such creatures, and after a wild windstorm, we found dozens of them all over the cemetery. They must have been blown all the way across the valley. It took us several weeks to get rid of them, and they gave me the creeps. I would stop near a tree, and suddenly one would lower itself to eye level. The whole crew was jittery until we got rid of them all. Another summer, we battled hordes of grasshoppers. They would come out of a nearby field and literally cover the roads. People would come to funerals and freak out to see the ground crawling with bugs. It was like a horror movie with women shrieking and stumbling back to their cars. I was quite embarrassed. We tried everything to eliminate them, and finally we bought a product called Bug Be Gone. It worked miraculously. So we stocked up on several $100s worth of the stuff for the next year. Naturally, we never had such a massive bug problem again. If you need some bug be gone, I know where you can get some real cheap. Getting a leg up. My favorite, sorry, my favorite headstone in our cemetery tells the story of its occupant who made his way to the grave in two parts. The first time came in the late 1800s when, as a young man, he tried to stop a bank robbery. While pursuing the thieves, his left leg was shot off below the knee. He survived, but the family didn't expect him to live long, so they just buried his leg in a box in the family plot, expecting that he'd soon follow the leg into the ground. But the man pulled through, and he didn't die for another 40 years. When the cemetery crew dug his grave, they found the long forgotten leg. The workers wrapped it up and slipped it into his coffin during the burial. So after 4 decades, all his body parts were reunited. Speaking of detached limbs, we have in our cemetery database the burial record from the early 1920s, the lower half of Mrs. Robinson's leg. There is no indication that the rest of Mrs. Robinson ever made it to our cemetery, and she is certainly dead by now. I have often wondered, though, if she had ever hobbled out up to the cemetery to visit her missing appendage. What would she leave at the gravesite? A sock and a shoe? Rock on. One July day, I read in the newspaper that a terrible accident had claimed the lives of 3 sisters from our area. The women were all in their mid-20s, and they were the fan club presidents of a modern rock band. In fact, they had been traveling between concerts when they accidentally drove off a cliff. I hadn't never heard, oh my God, I hadn't never heard of the band before or since, but as the sisters' family came to select a gravesite, they were excited that the band had agreed to attend the funeral. I would tell you the band's name, but I honestly can't remember it. On the day of the funeral, the family arrived early for the graveside service and waited expectantly for the band to arrive. The girl's uncle told me, "These guys are going to be huge. They just finished their first video." Within minutes, a black stretch limo pulled into the cemetery and parked in front of my office. A huge security guard leaped out and scanned the area and then shouted at me, "Stay back! Don't bother the band!" Yeah, as if I'd be waiting to mob them. Then the 3 band members got out and they looked ridiculous. These stars were wearing some of the ugliest clothes I had ever seen at a funeral, and that's saying a lot. One man wore what looked like a dirty brown blanket, and the other guy wore what could only be described as a miniskirt and a halter top. Then a woman who obviously fancied herself as the band's main attraction got out of the limo. Her jet black hair was spiked, and she was wearing white face paint, which didn't go well with her nearly transparent pink plastic dress. She strutted around with her nose in the air, clearly miffed by the lack of fans there to worship her. In fact, all 3 seemed quite perturbed at having to attend the burial of their fan club presidents. As the graveside service ended, those superstars basically sprinted back to their limo. I overheard the guy in the miniskirt say to the driver, "Step on it, let's blow this joint." You have to admire entertainers who truly connect with their fans. Good Lord. Okay.
Literally just reading and listening to it like my neck tense.
I know.
Gives
My
me a headache.
shoulders are like up near my earlobes right now. I'm like Quasimodo.
I
Like,
know.
it's just, and some of it is so made up and contrived, and it's like, why would you even make up stuff that's so ridiculous, disrespectful, and disgusting?
Mm-hmm.
Why? I'm so sure they said, "Step on it, let's blow this joint." Like,
Right.
come on, Chad. I mean, he can't be bothered to remember the band's name. He honestly can't remember. I just can't remember. I I think we might hear that in court. I don't recall. I don't recall.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness.
Is this book science fiction? It's something. Car Guy 72. I don't know what it is.
I don't know.
So we're like 44% of the way through the book. We had said that we were only gonna be on here about an hour and a half. So I don't think we're gonna jump to the next chapter right now because literally I can't stand this man. I know most of us can't stand this man. And I don't think I can read another 16-minute chapter of his book tonight. Um, what do you
Oh
guys
dear.
think down there? What do you think about this? Do you think he's just, is it made up? Is it, I think part of it's true. And I think he took pride in things like shoveling a deceased human body into a snow shovel and throwing it back in the grave. Um, and the septic tank part made me sick.
He's just so he he fancies himself so superior to everybody else that he can't even stand the fact that three young girls that are president of a fan club have the band that they worshipped come to their funeral, and he's like poo-pooing it.
Yeah.
Like,
Finding Hope said, is this the reason the attorney kept trying to stress that he's a fictional book writer because some of this seems to incriminate him? Maybe, but this is
yeah.
of all the books that Chad wrote, he wrote two that are about himself. One was that god awful autobiography we read, and
And this
this
one,
this is the second one that he wrote. So he's claiming this as his truth. So I don't know. I don't know.
he does. He was jealous of the band. The band was getting more attention. I think he thinks of these funerals like he is the rock star. Like, I dig the grave. I put the body in the grave. If I don't like the body, I mistreat the body. If I don't like the grave, I spit on the grave. If I don't want it, I mean, he's, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't.
I just saw, is it Lizard Tia? 10% true, 90% Chad sick fantasies. I almost started to say Listardia. I was like, my eyes are playing tricks on me.
Luna Girl said Chad makes the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard seem perfectly sane. That's funny.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah,
If you
you
listen
know,
to
why does
this,
he always go looking? Like when he knows that people are having sex in the graveyard, he's like a creepy teenage, what do you call the people that peep in windows, or peeping Tom? You know,
yeah,
and then he goes out there to like investigate. What's to investigate? Why do you need to go do that?
I'm
What
not
are
even
you
sure that people were really having sex on top of a grave.
No.
I
And
mean, you're talking. Think about the community he lived in, the town he lived in.
a semi truck and a police car, like come on.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like I thought he was just getting a ticket, but no.
yeah, yeah.
He's
He's
I mean everything I everything to me sounds like, not that I have a lot of experience with this at all, but it just sounds like those stereotypical like porn scenarios that people make fun of, like knock knock, I have a pizza. Oh, I'm waiting at the graveyard for it. You know, like it's just gross. It's like he's just he's a creepy, sexually repressed weirdo.
yeah, yep, he is. Um, can you imagine like what he thought when somebody like Lori Vallow walked in his life?
Oh my
I
gosh.
mean,
Well, you know, I did that. I ain't saying he's a grave digger, but he ain't messing with no broke de broke. Yep.
yeah, yeah,
Lori Vallow met her at a beauty salon. Yeah, he must have just been like, good Lord. He was like, he went from like potato to French fries, like all
oh my
sissy.
gosh. No, he's not worthy of French fries. French fries are a good thing.
All right, well, he was kettle chips. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
He's
Lori's definitely not a French
poutine.
fry.
I don't know. He's gross. He's a flat potato pancake. what he is.
What was that, Tracy L? You just heard nails and hat are their names, if you don't mind. What?
What? No, she just heard the Huskies' nails and what are their names if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. So my Huskies' names are Zeke and Corona. I did not name either one of them. They're both rescues. Corona is my female husky. She is the same age as my dog that was just put to sleep. So she's about 10. And Zeke is 4. Zeke is the one that you normally hear barking and making a ruckus in the background because he's just a
He's
wild.
like a teenage husky right now, so
He
he's a
is.
wild man.
Yep. As my son says, he's a 28-year-old young man in dog years. So
Aww.
yep, Zeke and Corona. So we call Corona Roni.
Oh.
Yeah.
They're having a lot of fun playing with the word sexton. Did you
That's
see
funny.
before?
I
Like,
see. Finding
yeah.
hope. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, and I think Glowing Ember in the beginning said, like, that's what Lori called him when he was on top of her or something.
Oh my God.
Sexton.
You're right, Margaret. Zeke, the interior decorator. Yes, he rearranges my couch cushions for me very often and throws them off the couch and pulls the cushions off the chairs, and he's a wild one. So,
Oh,
Lori,
you're thinking the band might be Weezer? That's interesting. I'd like to know. I actually would like to know who the band is, but they don't have a woman forefront person.
huh?
Hmm.
Cheryl Flowers.
I just saw it.
You smell burnt plastic and carnations.
3 times a day, according to Melanie Gibb. God.
Ew. I agree. Snowflake Sue. Ew. Gross.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Tracy.
Oh, okay. Night Shift Sister. I found a link. Weezer mourns tragic death of fan club leaders. That's interesting.
That is
I, I,
really
I would
interesting.
like to see that, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd like to see it too.
How do you read his book and then get naked with that man?
That
I
yeah,
won't.
that's $1 million question right there. I
Hmm.
mean, Lori could have made money by answering that question because she read all of his books. And I'm wondering if I can return this Emma book that I have to Amazon because I don't even want to read it. I wonder if they'll take
Well,
it back.
the Emma trilogies, that's all like fiction, right? But like he
Yeah, there's supposed to be, I guess there's references within there that kind of line up with this case.
mm-hmm.
But I don't know if we can get through it
Hmm.
mentally because they're awful.
Right.
So, does he talk back? Don, are you talking Zeke? Yes, he talks back. Both of my huskies do like the typical husky stuff. They grumble, they talk to you. They have certain like grumbles and noises that they make and you know what they want when they do
Oh,
it. So,
oh, Mandy Mixed Media Queen, you finally caught alive. Yay. So welcome. But I
yeah.
also wanted to say this is such a good idea. We should donate these books to jail. Snowflake Sue says send it to someone in his jail, and then they'll just like beat his
No,
ass for writing that crap.
we're going to send them to Letitia. She likes to read so much.
Uh,
We could send her Dave L's books.
we could.
Think she'd read them?
I'd rather Chad get his ass beat for like putting crappy books in the library and then be able to beat up the author.
That's true. That's true. These 2 books that we've read so far, we can't donate because they are Kindle editions.
Oh,
But
girl, I'll write them out.
print them and mail them?
I'll handwrite them.
Oh my gosh. That's funny. All right, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up. It's Sunday night. I'm tired. I know Amy's tired.
I
I still have
am.
to
My
run a kid
kiddos
to the
ran me
store.
ragged
And
today.
what?
I said, my kiddos ran me ragged today. I look like something a cat coughed up. And I don't even have a cat. So, I'm
Thank
so,
you, Mandy, Mixed Media Queen, for becoming a member.
yay!
Um, we appreciate that. You guys, everything is in the description of our videos. You can find the links to all the playlists, the links to all the Facebook groups, the links on how to become a member, how to join Patreon, all that good stuff. They're all there. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, we love spending the evenings with you guys too. It doesn't matter how tired we are or anything like that. Like once we actually get on, it like I don't know, it puts me in a good mood. So
it puts me in a good mood too, definitely. If I didn't have
yeah.
to, I have to run and get notebooks and pencils for my one son, and I have to get my other son's football stuff ready. So, when is the next reading? Diana says. I don't know, Amy. When do you want to read again? Tomorrow night?
um yeah, tomorrow or Tuesday. Either
Yeah.
one. Either one.
Yeah.
Actually, I would Tuesday I have to be up at 4:30 in the morning tomorrow. 4 in the morning
Oh,
tomorrow. Yeah. I
okay.
don't know
So,
if I'll make it very late tomorrow night, even though I'm not a sleeper. I could do tomorrow night. I could rally. I could do. Hang on
we'll
the edge of
figure
your
it out.
seats. Take
Yeah.
your anti-nausea shots. Take your Pepto Bismol.
Take some Motrin before you start listening because we
Yeah.
know it's awful.
Wear those like motion sickness bands on your arms.
Yeah.
So you won't get, queasy. When
Yeah.
Chad's rocking your world with his literary skills.
Gross. Gross. All right, guys, to our bomb squad down there, thank you so much to all of you who come in here and moderate for us and do such an amazing job
Yes.
down there in the chat. Everybody who is in the chat, we are so grateful for you, whether you are a YouTube member or just hanging out in the chat with us. We appreciate you guys.
Yes. We do. We do. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and then hit that notification bell so you never miss a live. You never want to miss a live. Ever, ever, ever. And on
Yeah,
that note, I'm going to say goodnight to all of you. Thank you for being here. This channel is nothing without you, and we appreciate it. So,
absolutely. Good
good
night.
night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good
Good
night.
night, guys. Have a good night.